All right, we are going to jump into training and development here. Chapter 8. We all set up here? Okay. We're good. So I want to contrast the two really quick before we get going. A lot of people use training and development kind of interchangeably. They're actually very different. So a lot of times what I'll do, you can see it down here, I'll pass like a pen and a paper around the classroom, like just kind of say something or recall an experience that changed like, who you are. Not taught you how to weld or taught you how to shoot a basketball, but kind of changed what you're about. And we go around the room where some people want to share, some people don't. But inevitably, it is a negative experience. It's very rare when someone says, hey, it was the fourth quarter, there was 10 seconds left, and I was the quarterback and threw an 80-yard touchdown, and at that moment, I knew I could do anything. No, it doesn't happen like that. It's usually like parents divorce or grandma died or something it kind of shook you to your core. And then I say, well, and how did that affect you? And they almost always have, not always, but almost always have some kind of a positive testimony. Here's how that changed me for the better, or developed my character, developed my perspective, or made me work hard, or something like that. Which in some ways is ironic. If you think about human nature, we actually try to avoid pain and pursue pleasure, right? It's called hedonism. And yet when we're asked to recall the things that shaped our lives for the better, there's usually an element of pain involved. But having said that, so training development, very different things. We're going to focus this chapter in on training specifically with a key definition. It goes like this: is a process whereby people acquire capabilities to perform jobs. So there's a few assumptions in this. To start with, we're assuming that people can actually acquire capabilities. That is, people can learn to do things. And then they will actually do them different on the job. Second, there's an assumption that capabilities affect performance on the job, which I think we have that. But you can see as we look at this, we go, okay, each one of these has to actually tie together or it's not training. If I'm not adding capabilities, it's not training. If I'm not adding capabilities for performance on the job, then it's not organizational training. It might be helpful, it might even be educational, but when we talk about training, it's very specific. We're basically tooling somebody up to do better on their job. From a macro level perspective, there's a few things I want to say on this. Strategic training, that just means like you're actually being intentional. You're thinking about what does our organization need, our workforce need, that's consistent with our mission and our strategy. It's not just training for training's sake, right? We have a particular pathway that we're walking through with objectives and tactics as a company, and we want to tool up and equip our human capital to be able to go in that direction. The other thing that it can do is if you have a bit of a strategic training plan, you're not going to assume that everything can be solved by training. There are things called states and traits. You can teach me to weld, but you may not be able to teach me astrophysics. So certain things I can and can't learn. Certain things can and can't be trained. And so to say, oh, well, we have a problem, the solution must be more training. Well, no, you pause for a minute and see if there's evidence that training will actually help. So you don't need to focus in on the content of this slide, but get the process of the slide. The idea is that if you're a manager and you're leading a team, you should be able to articulate to that team, this is the training and this is how it fits in with organizational strategy or some kind of organizational imperative. Meaning if it's sexual harassment training, that's based on the values of our company. If it's training about intercultural competence, that's because the strategy of our company is to be a multinational company in 5 years, and we have to have some kind of a global mindset somewhere in our human capital to be able to facilitate that. So you can see strategies, you can see tactics, or the outcomes of those strategies, and then our training activities. So as a manager, you got to be able to convince or sell, whatever the word is, but in a matter of like procedural justice, to explain to your team, no, what we're doing is actually important. And then if you can't, of course, ask the question. And sometimes you don't have that control, but you can ask the question, why are we doing this? And that's just fine. A couple legal issues in training. This is from a kind of an employee advocate, kind of tactician level for human resource management. And there's a bunch of them, but I want to point to one specifically. The very first one, selecting individuals for training. It's a constant battle where a firm will say, "Man, we're having challenges getting the composition of our management or our executive team to look like our workforce. We now have our workforce." Kind of in terms of demographic composition, it looks like the labor market. So say, yeah, we're doing good there. There's back to chapter 3. There's 15% Hispanic employees in the labor market, and there's 15% in our company. But when we look at management and executive level leadership, we see there's 2%, and for some reason we're not able to change that. We're just going to put someone in the role who's not ready, etc. A lot of that goes back to the 5 years earlier when you had a management development program and nobody was thinking, who gets into this? You may have thrown it out there and said, oh, whoever wants in, whoever wants to do this, you can do it. And what happened is you had a particular demographic group say, yes, I want in, but not other demographic groups. Or you hand selected people and it wasn't some kind of utilization analysis wasn't considered, meaning the people that were hand selecting, do they look like everybody else on our executive team or not? So that kind of lays the foundation for then who's ready. After 3 or 4 years of some kind of a management development program, who's actually ready for the executive level. So just a heads up, when we are establishing training, we got to be intentional about who actually is going to get this training, because in theory, if we're going to design it to make them better at their job, what we're doing is we're handing somebody, in a sense, kind of a leg up on their job. Types of training, this is just a framework to know. It's nothing super complex about it. There's legally required training on every job. If you've ever been involved like DOT or truck driving or, well, actually any job, safety, sexual harassment, diversity, stuff like that, you're going to say, we're going to do this each time, maybe once a year, once every 2 years. And some of that is about values of the company, and some of that is about what's called an affirmative defense, meaning if I train you how to safely operate a bandsaw, and you use that bandsaw and you cut your buddy with that saw, I can say, from a liability perspective, I can say, no, wait a second. Like, there was a solid training that was vetted, that everyone agreed that this is a good training, and they took it and they knew better. They knew they shouldn't have taken the bandsaw and thrown it at their buddy, something like that. So it has to do with liability, but not all. There's so legally required training. There's basic remedial skills that happens depending on your type of job. Job and technical training. This is especially when you're using equipment, or especially when like a software, or if you have an IT-based job, which of course many are, that has changed. So you don't just change the person's main tool and say go figure it out. You give them training. And then of course soft skills. We see that more when we get into like team leads and managers. As an agent of the company and as modeling appropriate behaviors, but it, of course, can happen at any level of the organization. Okay, 2 main things I want to hit here. One of them is an onboarding process, so we have that in our vernacular, and the other one is what's called an ADDIE model, which I'll explain in just a minute. It's kind of just a trained design model. So first, onboarding. So orientation. Is a major step in onboarding. It's basically when you hire somebody, when you get them to say yes, keep in mind you've spent time and money and effort and meetings and interviews, etc., saying, yes, this is the person that we want. Now you've hired them. What are you going to do with that asset? Are you going to say, here's your workstation, go? Or are there things you can do on the front end as they are being onboarded into your organization to make it to where you're a higher possibility of good performance, but really about retention? Meaning after 3 days on the job, do they say, this place is awesome, like they were ready for me here? Maybe a weird example is if you go over to a friend's house to have dinner at 6, and at 6:30 they start asking, hey, so what do you want to do for dinner tonight? You go, well, you actually weren't ready for me. Like I'm not really kind of welcomed in here. So this is almost like a hospitality component. Because obviously you can see some of the benefits, good impression, but a big part of it is socialization to the culture, the environment, the job, the expectations, and they come up to speed more quickly. You can see a few things. One of them on the onboarding process is you want to know, what do new hires expect? So how do we find that information? You go take your last 10 new hires and you got a focus group, or you take them out to lunch and you say, hey guys, you've been here for a month, 6 months, a year. what would have been really helpful in the first few days on your job? What would have been like just, money in your hand helpful for how to get integrated quickly? And then they come up with some crazy ideas. I mean, you don't know, like, hey, parking sucked, and is there any way we can do about that? Just in the first week, just until we get settled. Or I didn't meet my manager for the first 7 days. A lot of organizations now, I know Google and IBM are both big on this. You're going to meet your manager the first day there. No matter where your manager is, they will actually schedule your start date around you're going to connect with that person. So little things like that. Okay, create connections, add networks. That's your friendship. The Gallup organization's actually got some neat research that says if you have a best friend at work, that's one of the best predictors of turnover. So it's getting people connected quickly. Anyway, you get the idea. Basically, be intentional. When you bring someone on board, you go, what do we do to make sure that they come up to speed quickly, and then it's a positive experience. How do we know if that's working well, right? So we've put all this time and effort into creating a good onboarding process. How do we know? And onboarding, of course, is a component of training. A few things: tenure turnover rate, new hire failure rate. So when someone quits after 90 days, we go, what happened? First year turnover rate is a killer. We talked about this a little bit in the turnover section and in job attitudes. But when you've gone through all this effort to get somebody kind of right skill set, right time, right number of people, and they quit in the first year before they're kind of higher up on the productivity level, it's so frustrating, so expensive. So part of that is adapting your onboarding program to do it. So that's it on onboarding. Give them big hugs. Well, maybe not, really, but give them big hugs when they come in and get them set up for success early. Okay, ADDIE model. The ADDIE model is like the bread and butter basic model. Anybody who's in training knows this. We have an entire elective course set up on how to do each one of these really well, including in our graduate program. So it begins with assessment. That is, if we're going to train on anything, the first question is assessment. What do we actually need training on? Is there a need for training, etc.? And what is the gap between where we are and where we need to be? Then you design, based on that assessment, you design your training program. Here's what it looks like. You develop it, ready to launch it, and then you launch it. That's the implementation. And then evaluation is, how do we do? That's one of the steps that almost everybody leaves out, but how did we do? Did it accomplish the intended effect? So a big component of the ADDIE model, of course, is the training needs assessment. Is training going to work? What form should it take on? Who's going to do it? Who's going to get trained? Who's in? Who's out? What's the process? What's the content? What are the dates? What's the budget? All that kind of stuff. And of course, the last one, how do we know if it actually worked? What is the performance assessment we're looking at the end? We'll get to this later, but a lot of times with the evaluation, what we do is we pass a stupid piece of paper around the room and we say, on a scale of 1 to 10, did you have a good time? We didn't do the training because so they would have a good time. We did it so people would learn and behave different and affect their job. Remember the definition, adding capabilities to their job so that they could perform differently and better. The other one is we say, would you recommend this training program to a friend? It's like, oh my goodness. So the evaluation has to be tied in with the purpose, of course, of the training. So how do we know if there is a training that's even needed? So here's a few things we can take from. If we have the same grievance, if we have 20 managers in our group and we have, I'm just throwing out numbers, 50 grievances a year, and those 50 grievances are between 2 managers, okay, let's go figure out if there's some kind of training or leader development or something that needs to happen there. So the grievances or accidents are a big one, of course. We have this in the safeties chapter, but when there's an accident, you're going to document what the steps you're going to take to prevent accidents in the future. Almost always one of those components is training. So you can see there's a million things here, performance evaluations. The idea is there something non-normal popping in the data that go, okay, that's standing out. Either there's an outlier or something unique that it wasn't that way last year or the year before or the year before, then you want to deal with it. Or It's always been that way, but our competitors don't seem to have these same problems. So how can we redesign work? How can we do training to solve it? This tells us if there's actually a problem. Just because an employee, a couple of employees, or a manager, executive says, "Hey, we need training on this." This is where you stand back and go, "No, wait a second. Let's get some data, and let's find out if it's an attribution issue or if there really is something that we need to train on and deal with." Different types of training. I'm sure you've seen this before. Once we have this gap analysis laid out, like here's where we are, here's where we want to be, we go, okay, what are the main things we need to see? Is this a skill issue? Do we have people that are not skilled in operating this new piece of technology? Is this a knowledge issue? People don't know. My head goes to Boeing with a lot of examples, but people don't know now how to interact with the Federal Aviation Administration with this certification of an aircraft. Do they need training in knowing how to do their job? Is it an attitude issue? Are we treating suppliers so poorly in our contract process they're actually leaving and taking better deals to our competitors? Stuff like that. So it can be each one of those. Each can be trained on. Of course, when we think of the standard idea of training, usually it's skill and behavior. But of course, now in a human capital economy, we deal with all three of them, and we deal with them often. So once we've decided what needs to be trained, we've seen the gap analysis, then we have to ask some questions about who is going to get trained. Like, do they have the ability to be trained? And this is not a popular concept, but I've used this example before. Like if I was really desiring to replace Bobby Wagner to be the linebacker of the Seattle Seahawks, you can't give me enough training to make that happen. It's not necessarily a knowledge issue, although it might be. It's certainly a muscle twitch issue. It's a size and strength issue. It's a probably weak bone structure issue compared to him. So we go, no, he can't. No matter how much training we give Avy, he's not going to be an NFL football player. He's bounded by a lot of things, including ability. So, and this isn't meant to slam your employees, say, oh, well, they're too dumb to learn that. It's meant to take a realistic assessment and go, are our expectations conducive to the human capital that we've hired and the people that kind of we're paying to be here? So if I want to train everybody in global competence and this global mindset so they can go out and be multinational leaders, and I've attracted those people to my company paying $13 an hour, I need to realistically take a look at what is the ability to learn that with my team. Another one is motivation. Do people care? Like, is this really, really important to you, but nobody else? So it's important to you as an executive or manager. Go, we need to learn this. We need to do better. And they just go, whatever, man. I clock in, clock out. I get paid whether I learn that or not. There's no care. So there's things we can do to motivate. That is showing consistent with the strategy, offering incentive pay, maybe stuff like that. But having paid training time, of course. But are they motivated? If not, we're managers. We should be pretty good at motivating people, right? We know those. We have those tools in our toolbox. So anyway, the next one is self-efficacy. This one is particularly potent when someone is doing something new. So there's generalized self-efficacy and task-specific self-efficacy. So I think I am pretty good at shooting a lay-in basketball. I don't have high generalized self-efficacy like I'm, high task efficacy, meaning I'm a good basketball player. I mean, I can shoot a lane, so it's very specific. There are some people, they just believe that they're going to be pretty good at pretty much everything they do. That's generalized self-efficacy. So if your employees who you're training don't believe, they don't have confidence that they will be able to succeed in the task, they're not going to do it. It's pretty straightforward. It's like the last 30 years of, Tony Robbins and consulting and books, and I call them airport books, and they all drive me crazy, but they're this concept of the power of positive thinking, and everybody goes, oh my gosh, like we're so sick of this, and go, well, actually, there's a really important scientifically backed up component to it. It comes from social learning theory, a guy named Albert Bandura, and self-efficacy is the second highest predictor of performance that we've seen in the last 30 years. It has a 0.38 correlation meta-analytically with performance. So it matters if people think they're going to be good at something. If they think they can do it, then they generally will. Well, when we're training somebody on something new, and there you can see like the insecurity, the lack of confidence, like I don't think I can do this. Stop, hold the phone. Don't just march through the training program. There's 4 ways to develop self-efficacy, and you're going to have to build confidence in them if you're going to get the full ROI of the training expenditures that you're doing. Perceived utility and value. Again, do they care about it? Is it useful to their job? That's up to you as a manager to show them it is. And the last one, learning styles. There are different learning styles. I know we get this. There's actually recent science that says this is abused, might be the right word, or it's over considered, meaning, oh, I'm a visual learner. That's how I learn. I can't learn auditory. Well, yeah, you can. You just may not learn as well. So there might be dominance in each one of these areas, but generally people can learn unless there's some kind of a disability. Generally, on average, people can learn across all of these. Auditory learner is you hear it, you get it. If that's you, you're pretty rare. If you can listen to me talk PowerPoint slides, and you're like, oh yeah, totally, I'm all in. That's rare. That's cool. Tactile learner is more common. That is, tactile learner will usually see it, the visual piece, and then do it. Like, I have to touch this product. If you're going to teach me how to weld, I can't watch a video. Like, put the welding machine in my hand, right? Give me the arc on the vice grip thing. I don't even know what those things are called. Anyway, that's a tactile learner. And then visual learners. This is, again, this is modeling, meaning I need to see somebody do this. And if you're trying to enhance my self-efficacy that I can slam dunk a basketball, don't give the basketball to LeBron James and say, well, he did it, James, you can do it. It's very different. You need to give it to a short, pudgy, balding guy like me and have him dunk it. And I'll be like, oh, okay, well, that guy that's modeling it looks more like me, and that's more likely to enhance my self-efficacy to say, yeah, maybe I can do that. Anyway, different learning styles. Usually the cheapest way for us to deliver training is for auditory learners. That's not most people. So depending on how important your training is that you're giving, what you don't want to do is say, well, I told you, like I gave you a book, so you're responsible for it. No, if you really want them to learn it, you're going to design your training to hit each of these different learning styles. A few more components in the design and development phase of the ADDIE model. Overlearning, that is, even when you have it. I'm coaching a 4th grade basketball team right now, right? Yes, I know you know how to make a lay-in, sort of. Everyone's gonna make at least 10 lay-ins before we start practice. So it's overlearning to where you get it, it's built in, you're establishing basically a neural pathway. The next one is behavioral modeling. And that's what we talked about earlier with the visual learners. Like, if you can see somebody do it and do it correctly, you're more likely to get it. So if we're gonna put some of these together, it's like I will tell you how to weld these 2 pieces of metal together. I'll explain it, and then I will model it to where you see someone do it, and then I'll put it in your hand to where you do it. And that way they've heard it, they've seen it, and then they've done it, and then rinse and repeat. And you keep rolling until you get a low error rate or a 0 error rate. Error-based examples. This is the fear-based training. This is when you're trying to teach someone to safely drive a forklift, and so you show them the results of a couple accidents where people have been injured and stuff like that, to go, if we don't do this right, if we don't get this, here's what happens. All right. Reinforcement theory, you probably got this in your Psych 101 class and a little bit on the motivation topic that we covered earlier. That's pretty straightforward. That is, when somebody does the right thing, you reinforce it, and you reinforce it quickly. And when they do the wrong thing, you can choose. Are you going to do punishment, which actually breeds resistance, so use that as little as possible, but extinction is kind of the right way to do it. So imagine a kid shooting lay-ins and go, no, elbows in, no, bend your knees, elbows in, bend your knees, elbows, yes, like that right there, like that right there. So as soon as they get it right, you're trying to establish that neural pathway, in this case of basketball form, go, right, that, just like that, do that again. So that would be like a positive reinforcement. Transfer of training. This is the unicorn, right? This is what we're looking for. They get it in the classroom. They get it as close to the job as possible. It mirrors job context as much as possible. And then they took what they learned, and there's always loss. I learned these 10 things, But when I got on my job, when the situation was hot and it was happening, I only did 6 of them. Okay. Well, there was some transfer of training. If there's no transfer of training, then we wasted our time. We designed the training poorly. We've lost all that money. We've lost all that time and probably credibility. So what we really want here is whatever we train them on, that knowledge or skill or attitude actually transfers over to the job. And as much as we can assess that, measure that, then that's optimal. There's internal training. There is also external training, outsourced training. This is when, if you don't have the expertise in-house, or if you don't have the budget or time in-house, or it's something broad. If it's something really specific to your company, then you probably want to own it. But if it's something broad, hey, everybody knows, everybody needs to be 40-hour OSHA trained who works with these chemicals right here. Okay, you can outsource that. You don't have to do it in-house. This is the example that's in my head, of course, every day is educational assistance programs, where companies would say, okay, Central has this HR graduate program. We have people who are moving into HR, so we're going to send them there to pay for it. Well, that's outsourcing your training. You're developing HR competencies in your management team, but you're not doing it yourself. Again, internal, external training. And then at the end we go, did it work? Did it actually work? There are 4 levels of training evaluation. They are right here. They are going from least valid or least useful to most useful. So let's say I'm trying to train, again, I'll stick with the same example because it's simple. My 4th grade basketball team had to make lay-ins. And at the end of practice, I say, did you guys have a good time as we practice lay-ins today? That's their reaction. Questionnaire, like what did you think about it? Would you recommend this to your other 4th grade friends? You know, stuff like that. And then the learning is, explain to me what we talked about, right? Explain to me about the rule on traveling or using the backboard or shooting form, something like that. The next level of evaluation is I say, okay, now go do it. Now I'm going to record you. And we're going to see from the beginning of this training to after this training, are your behaviors any different, right? That is, not just can you explain to me the words that I told you, but are you doing things different? That's where we get transfer from cognition to behavior. And then finally, in a game, we're going to throw up a bunch of lands and we're going to get it on video and go, did our shooting percentage increase? Did they make the lay-ins in the way that we talked about? And ultimately, did it help them, in this case, simple example, I keep continuing, did it get them more points? See, I didn't train them this lay-in so they would have a good time, or they'd even be able to describe what a lay-in is, or even do it with no pressure in practice. The idea was, in a game context, what we just worked on, are you now doing it different? That's the ultimate test, is the results. This happens often when we do business training, even managerial training, leadership training, diversity, etc. It's, did you have a good time? Maybe a little test that says, did you learn this? And then there's hardly ever behavioral assessment, and almost never, okay, well, we just had 40 salespeople take a training. Let's compare what they did last year to what they did after the training. Or even better, let's have a control group. Let's take those 20 people who are going to get training and let's separate them. Let's give 20 salespeople the training first, let a couple months go by and see if they sell more as a result of the training. If they don't sell more, then maybe we make it voluntary because maybe it didn't work. Or if they sell more, then we add this next 20 and we see, can we replicate those results? These 20 get the training, they sell more. Okay, let's see if it can happen again. These 20 get the training, they sell more. Hey, sweet. Now we have return on investment and we have a result-based outcome that says we didn't waste our time in training. If we do the evaluation correctly, I've had this conversation so many times with managers, this training will produce X. And they go, well, I mean, that's like in theory it should. I go, no, not in theory. Like, here's the data. If you can set up, especially if you can have random assignment, it's not that hard. People think there's no way to get a pure evaluation. Yes, there is. You take a group of people, you randomly assign them to 2 different groups. That establishes what's called initial equivalence, meaning it's not like the good group and the bad group or the dumb group and the smart group. Random assignment is you're going to get on average, this group will be about the same as this group. And then you give one of them the training. You give them all a pre-test. You give one of the groups the training, another test, then you give the last group the training. The only difference is you're doing the training twice. It's not going to kill your budget because you've already designed the training, and you'll actually have hard evidence to say, you know what, we're never doing that training again. We wasted our time. Or that was freaking awesome. We developed that in-house. Not only are we going to use it here, we're going to package that and sell that training to our customers because this data is pretty amazing. We've done that a few times. So all in all, that is a short and sweet training and development.